Hi there, everyone. My name is Max Young, and on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in tonight. Tonight, we are lucky to have with us Cindy Lin, who will be in conversation with Laura Ling and her daughter as well, discussing Cindy's book, Treasures of the 12. We're so grateful that all of you can make it tonight and that our bookstore is able to continue bringing you incredible authors throughout this uncertain time. Thank you for supporting us. If you'd like to go ahead and purchase a copy of Cindy's book, you can go ahead and click the green button down here. And I'm sure Cindy will talk to you a little bit later about other promotions that she has going on with her book. And this evening's event also includes a Q&A section. So if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and click the Ask a Question button down here. And you can vote for which questions you'd like the most. They'll make it to the top of the list, and those are likely to get answered first. But with that all out of the way, let me go ahead and introduce the authors. So first off, Cindy Lin is a former journalist with degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University, and has worked for Sony Pictures Entertainment, and has also written and produced many multimedia news features for children, one of which received a Peabody Award. And of course, she is the author of The 12 and today's book, The Treasures of 12. And with her, Laura Ling is an award-winning journalist and author. She most recently hosted the Discovery mini documentary series, The Power of Kindness, that looks at the scientific roots and benefits of being kind. She hosts Everyday Bravery, a podcast about overcoming life's biggest challenges. Her work has appeared on ABC's Nightline, NBC, and PBS, and she has also written for Los Angeles Times as well as CNN. So with that all out of the way, let me go ahead and let them take the screen. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Lee.
Hi.
So good to see you guys.
Well, first of all, thank you, everyone, for being here at this virtual book launch and the celebration for Treasures of the 12, written by the incredible Cindy Lin. Where's our book copy, Lee?
Yay!
Yay! I am Laura, and I'm joined here by my 10-year-old daughter, Lee, and we are both huge fans of these books, and we're so thrilled to be here today. Cindy and I first met nearly 20 years ago. We were working at a media company called Channel One News. It was an educational news program that aired in public and private middle schools and high schools throughout the United States. And it was our job to make news and the headlines of the day interesting and engaging and understandable for a young teenage audience, which wasn't always the easiest thing to do, right, Cindy? Mm-hmm. And while you and I both, continued down the media path and worked in nonfiction, Cindy veered toward a path that really followed this inner passion of writing fiction, but still targeting a young adult audience. And we're so glad that she did, because she has gifted all of us with this wonderful duology, The 12, and now the newly released Treasures of the 12.
No, this is the 12.
I know I said The 12.
No, but then you put that up on it.
With these two wonderful books. Cindy, you have created characters, these young warriors with passion and talents based on the Chinese Zodiac. You've transported readers to this vibrant mythical land, Midaga, and you've brought to life a story that is full of drama, adventure, and I think above all, heart. So I would love to talk to you about your process and your inspiration. And I also want to remind the audience here to ask a question. I will try to scroll down and look at the questions and answer them throughout the conversation. And I apologize in advance if we don't get to all of them, but please, if you have a question for Cindy, ask away. And Cindy, I guess I'll just start off by asking you, what was your inspiration for writing these two books? And did you always know that you would be writing a sequel?
So I always wanted to write for kids, which is probably why I ended up at Channel One in the first place, just because as a journalist, the chance for explaining the news to kids was just irresistible. But even before I became a journalist, I really wanted to write books for kids ever since I was 10. Even when I was like 10 years old, that's all I wanted to do, was to write children's books. And it was something I dreamed about, but I never really allowed myself to go for it until the last 10 years or so. So it was about 2009 when I finally decided to take a class in writing fiction, because I had never written fiction before. So I took a class in creative writing at UCLA Extension. And it was right around the time of the Lunar New Year. So it was the year of the rat, and it was going to be the year of the ox. So it was kind of like, you know, you would see it in the news, you would see it like, you know, in the Chinese supermarkets, people were getting ready for the upcoming year of the ox. And I just started thinking, oh, the ox. And I was, you know, taking this class of creative writing, and, you know, so you're trying to look around you for story ideas. And it just occurred to me with everyone saying, oh, it's the year of the ox. And my sister is born in the year of the ox. And so, you know, she would say, oh, I'm an ox, or I'm a cow. And I would say, you know, like I know other people would say, oh, I'm a tiger, or I'm a rabbit. So people would identify themselves by saying, I'm in, you know, whatever animal of the zodiac that they are. And it just occurred to me, it was like, what would it be like if people actually were like a rabbit or a tiger or a dog? What would that mean? Because certainly animals have powers and abilities that we don't. So wouldn't that be really fun if you were born in the year of the ox and you had super strength? Or if you were born in the year of the horse and you were super fast? And it just sparked all these ideas of what it would be like, and what kind of world would that look like if people had those powers. And I just couldn't let go of the idea. So I started thinking about it, and I didn't know how to translate it into a story at the time because I was just starting out and I didn't know how. It just seemed overwhelming to me. So I kind of filed it away in the back of my head. And then about a year later is when I first started to try to turn it into a novel. And I took a novel writing class, and I started drafting, and I really didn't know what I was doing, but I gave it my best shot then. And in my head, I was like, oh, maybe we could have a different book for every animal of the zodiac. Or and I hadn't really thought of it as following one character through multiple books, but that was the idea at the time. And then as I came up with a story and was trying to figure out how to pitch it to both agents and then later to publishers, that's when I decided to focus on one character and then make it multiple books with her storyline going across multiple books. And so that's how we ended up with the current duology, The 12 and Treasures of the 12.
I love that it was just inspired by, and I think that's often the case, right? You were just kind of normal life out one day. I mean, I remember I every Chinese New Year, I go to the market to buy those red packets. That kind of, you know, can spark a whole
exactly.
series.
And every Chinese Year, I get more.
Yes. You are the beneficiary of the red envelope. You have a question, right?
Yeah. I really like your book. It's amazing. And I always like how they're having cliffhangers. So when you think that you can maybe go to bed or eat breakfast after you finish the chapter, you're always like, wait, I gotta read more and find out what happened. And then the next chapter, I was like, oh no, there's another cliffhanger. And my question is, what's your zodiac sign? And if you could have any zodiac powers of the characters in your books, what would it be and why?
I love that question because it's so much fun to think of powers and what you would do with them if you had them, which is why I came up with so many different powers and like to play with all the different zodiac animals. My own personal sign is the dog, and I do happen to have a very sharp sense of smell, which is sometimes handy, but if it's not always great to have a very sensitive nose because, you know, if the smells are bad, then you're kind of tortured for a while. But if I were to have a special power from the characters in my books, I'm pretty torn. I think it would be super awesome to have really good vision like Tora and her tiger vision, simply because I've worn glasses for a really long time. I'm wearing contacts right now, but it is kind of a pain to wake up in the morning and to be blind. So it would be really neat to be able to just look way off into the distance and to see anything and everything. That would be amazing. But then the other thing that I would really love to have is, so there is a character named Goru, and he is born in the year of the ox. And actually, he's on the cover, so he's like this really big guy. But you don't need to be big. His power is he's super, super strong, and I love that because I would love to be able to just crush like something impossibly hard to crush, like, I don't know, a giant piece of metal into like a little teeny ball, or to lift like a big barrel on just like the tip of my finger. Those are all things that he can do. So I kind of think that would be awesome. I would love to be super strong and have really good vision. I know that's 2 powers, so I kind of cheated, but what about you?
Well, my zodiac is the tiger, so I would probably like to have super good hearing, because then I would hear everything that they were saying, and if they were planning something secret, I would hear.
Well, you already hear everything we talk about, even if we're trying to be secretive. Well, you kind of tricked us, Cindy, because when I saw the rabbit necklace, I thought that you might actually be Year of the Rabbit. But I do want to remind anyone that if anyone has a question, please ask away on the Ask a Question button, because I'm going to click it right here and I don't see anything. So Cindy is here to answer your questions. And Cindy, would you share a little reading with us?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I have prepared a little excerpt from chapter 1. And just to set it up a little bit, so we've got Usagi, and she's the main character, and she's born in the year of the rabbit, and her best friend Tora, born in the year of the tiger. And they are with Nezu, who is born in the year of the rat. And so the 3 of them are on a mission to recover one of the treasures of the 12. And so this is the opening chapter, and they are in a harbor on Feather Island, where all these boats are coming in for trade. So I'm going to start off with this little excerpt. Though they'd been on Feather Island for nearly a week, Usagi was still dazzled by the sight of all the boats. Who knew there could be so many types of vessels to travel across water? There were ships with battened sails that folded like fans, sloops with white canvas billowing from the masts like puffed-out frogs' throats, squat boats with chimneys that belched smoke, armored ships bristling with fire cannon. Before the fall of the Shield of Concealment, the kingdom of Madaga had never seen so many visitors to its shores. It had remained hidden from the rest of the world, safe and protected by the warriors of the Zodiac, until Druk, the dragon warrior, betrayed his oath to the Circle of the 12. He shattered the shield, allowing invasion and war to devastate the land, and seized the throne as Dragon Lord. Now, 7 years into his reign, ships from lands near and far came to Madaga, eager to see and trade with the kingdom that had been but a myth for hundreds of years. The port in the Bantam Islands was bustling, and from his spare wooden lean-to on the main pier, the harbor master ruled over it all. Usagi, Tora, and Nezu, drew close and saw the line of ship captains and various agents waiting to report their cargo to the harbor master. The front of the shanty was wide open, flanked by 2 armored guards. They glowered beneath metal helmets that sat on their heads like overturned cookpots. Their burly torsos were shielded by iron breastplates, and their leather-sleeved arms cradled fire cannon. Usagi forced herself to hold her head up. She was the heir to the rabbit warrior after all. She'd spent months training and could handle them both if need be. She spotted the harbor master's bulky form and tall official's hat, but couldn't see the treasure. Fortunately, they had Tora's tiger vision, just as Usagi's sharp ears listened for them all. "Is it there?" Usagi whispered. Tora's eyes narrowed. "On his desk there's a pen, in a brush stand beside the cargo registry. It's bigger than an ordinary ink brush, with a gold handle decorated with the 12 animals of the Zodiac. It's got a gold cap, but he's taken it off. I see the bristles. They look like ox hair." "Ox, the animal embodying truthfulness," Nezu said. "That's the treasure, all right." They continued down the pier till they reached the last ship, which looked deserted, its cargo unloaded, the crew likely in the port taverns. They set their baskets down. Nezu wiped his face, then flashed a smile at Usagi. "How are your rabbit ears from here?" She tilted her head and squeezed her eyes shut, listening. Out of habit, Usagi reached for the pendant at her neck and rubbed the little silver rabbit with its chips of green jade for eyes. Over the cries of seagulls, the shouts of dock workers, the splash of seawater against creaking wooden hulls, and the clattering of wheels on cobblestones and planks, Usagi located the gravelly voice of the harbor master, which she'd come to recognize after several days of surveillance. He was interrogating his latest quarry in the line of ship captains and cargo masters waiting to report to him.
Name and vessel name? Captain Gole of the Fleet Fin Whale. Helm port? Port Busana in Solanus.
The harbor master would always ask first about the cargo and then hand over the pen of truth to sign off. That was the part that always made Usagi feel a little sorry for the harbor master's prey.
Oh, wait! I didn't mean to write that. That's a mistake.
Is it really, Captain? You aren't trying to skimp on paying your import duties, are you? If I have the guard go to your ship right now and search it, do you swear on your life we will only find 10 bales of cotton for trade instead of 15?
After some threats detailing what could happen to those caught trying to cheat the Dragon Lord, the harbor master would then offer the hapless victim an opportunity to buy his way out of trouble. In this way, Usagi noticed, the harbor master was becoming a very rich man. He's up to his usual tricks, she reported. Just got a Solani ship captain to hand over 5 gold mon for lying about his cargo. Nezu whistled. That's more than some people make in a lifetime. He peered into the water. Anyone getting hungry? Glancing around to make sure no one was looking, he made a little swirling motion with his hands until a small cyclone of water rose from the sea. Knitting his brow, he gestured sharply, and the cyclone spat a silvery fish onto the pier, where it flipped and flopped at their feet. Mealtime! Tora exclaimed. She pounced on the wriggling fish and dispatched it with a quick thump against the dock. Nezu cleaned the fish with his knife, slicing it into neat fillets. He portioned it out for the 3 of them with balls of rice wrapped in seaweed. It's too bad none of us have a fire gift, he remarked. A little blast of flame would sear this fish nicely. Usagi couldn't help but think of Uma at that moment. Her sister was able to conjure fire with her bare hands and had used her elemental gift to cook whatever they scavenged, back when they lived with Tora in the forest outside Golden Tusk. Now, Uma was part of the Dragon Lord's troops, a prized cadet in a corps of younglings with Zodiac powers, her fire gift and horse speed used as tools in maintaining order over all Medagians. Usagi's rabbit locket felt heavy at her neck, and she rubbed its hollow belly. It contained the charred remains of the wooden rabbit she used to wear until Uma had burned it in a fury. That was the last time Usagi had seen her sister. With a sigh, she sat with the others at the edge of the dock, dangling their feet over the swirling seawater. She was about to take a bite of rice ball when Tora stopped chewing and squinted down the pier. There's the harbor master's daughter, she muttered. Usagi turned and caught a small figure ducking behind the railing of a docked ship. Since coming to port, they'd seen the girl hanging around the docks, the only youngling who wasn't a porter, though she might as well have been one, dressed as she was in a ragged tunic and pants, a grimy white kerchief tied over a frizzled braid. Nezu draped some fish over his rice ball and took a bite. Are you sure she's his daughter? Seems more like a servant to me. He's always ordering her around. And slapping her if she's too slow, said Tora with a frown. They'd witnessed this harbor master boxing the girl about the ears when he wasn't in his shed extorting payment from ship captains. It had disgusted Usagi. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 and was spindly with large dark eyes that reminded her of Uma. Usagi got to her feet. I'll be right back. Where are you going? Tora cocked her head. Waving a vague hand, Usagi headed for the ship, eyes on where she'd last seen movement. She heard the growling of an empty stomach, only for once it wasn't hers. She stopped at the base of the lowered gangplank. Merciful spirits, what a lot of rice and fish, Usagi exclaimed. I can't eat all this by myself. What to do? As a dark head with wide eyes peered out, Usagi smiled. Oh, hello. She held up her rice ball. I've got a little too much here. Would you like some? The girl hesitated, then nodded. Usagi waved at her to come down, and she crept down the gangplank. Her face was smudged with dirt and soot, and she smelled like she'd been sleeping in a pile of fishnets. Usagi broke her rice ball in half and gave her most of her raw fish. Shyly, the girl took it and stuffed everything in her mouth all at once, as if she were afraid Usagi would change her mind. Usagi laughed. Slow down. You'll give yourself a bellyache. She took a bite of her own, then looked at the girl chewing mightily. eyes half closed in relief. It reminded Usagi so much of Uma that a lump came into her throat. Swallowing hard, she held out the rest of her food. Here, why don't you have some more? Eyes shining, the little girl took it. She bobbed her head in thanks. What's your name? Asked Usagi and pointed to herself. I'm Usagi, born in the year of the wood rabbit. The girl paused in her chewing and mumbled through a mouthful of rice.
Gee, year of the rooster.
I knew a boy back home who was born a metal rooster, Usagi said. Jago was always full of energy, as roosters often are. She took care not to mention that little Jago had developed the talent of flying or had been hauled away to serve the Dragon Lord. She waved a casual hand at the harbor master's station. So, is that your father in there? G stopped chewing, startled. Slowly, she nodded. You know that gold pen of his? Usagi pressed. It's so pretty. Do you know where he got it? Shaking her head, G backed away, eyes wide. No, wait! Usagi hadn't meant to alarm her, but the girl turned and ran back up the gangplank, disappearing into the ship. Spit and spleen! She'd said too much. Usagi stood there a moment, cursing herself, then returned to her friends. Nezu looked at her curiously. What were you trying to do there? I remember what it was like to be hungry, said Usagi with a sigh, and I thought maybe she could tell me about the pen, but she ran away before saying anything. Better to leave her alone, Nezu advised. The fewer people we speak to today, the better. We don't need anyone recognizing us after we've lifted the pen. He polished off the last of his rice ball and licked his fingers. Spirits, I could have eaten 5 of those. He tightened the leather belt at his waist. Decorated with silver, wood, and horn, the belt of passage was a precious heirloom, passed down from warrior to warrior in the Circle of the 12. That is, until the war had decimated their ranks and scattered their treasured artifacts around the kingdom. The belt had only recently been recovered, and the other warrior heirs had insisted that they bring it on this mission in case its powers were needed. Tora stiffened. The harbor master's leaving his station and dismissing the guard. He must be off to the tea house. Should we try for the pen now? Is it on him? Asked Usagi. From more than 200 paces away, she couldn't see much more than the harbor master closing the doors to his shed. Narrowing her eyes, Tora nodded. He's sticking it in the back of his belt, just as he has for the last 3 days. He's consistent, at least. Perfect. Nezu rubbed his hands and flashed a grin. I think we've watched and waited long enough. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Thank you so much. This was one of my favorite parts in the book, and there were so many, but I don't know about you. Weren't you so nervous when you were reading this? And
So I was talking about cliffhangers at the end of chapter.
and I think what's also so clever and fun about treasures is that you get a little bit of this in the 12, but first of all, you have these characters and their animal powers, their zodiac powers, but in treasures, you learn more about the treasures, which are have their own personality as well. So that it's so adventurous and so fun. And we have a bunch of questions, and I'm going to start with Sophia. Thank you. What powers do dragons have, and why did you pick a dragon as the bad guy?
Oh, that is such a good question. Hi, Sophia. I love that question. It's very thoughtful, and you're absolutely right that in Asian tradition, dragons are actually considered very benevolent. They're lucky, they're good. It's a very different view from Western tradition, where in Western mythology, dragons tend to be evil. They hoard their gold. They eat people, and they're always being slain by knights and stuff. So it's very different in the Western tradition, storytelling tradition. And I have to say that it did, growing up, reading all those Western stories definitely affected me without my even knowing it. So I did make the bad guy the Dragon Lord. And it wasn't until I started to really focus on and do research on mythology that I realized, wait, I am letting what I learned growing up with Western stories color how I'm telling the story that's coming out of, or that's incorporating Asian mythology. So I need to correct that. So with dragons, and in the second book, you'll see some good guys with dragon powers. I think that I wanted to correct that in my second book, and so there are many powers that dragons have in Asian mythology. One that's really well known is that they bring rain, because rain in any kind of agricultural society or any society, rain is very precious. So dragons have the ability to attract water. And then you have many different kinds of dragons. You have dragons that dominate the sea. There are little lucky dragons that live, in your house or in the eaves. There are, giant dragons that live beneath the earth. They're like earth dragons. There's so many different kinds. So you really could say that their powers could be anything. I don't want to give too much away, but I would say that I think I would say that some dragons are said to change their shape, and they can become very big or very small. So one potential power, which I don't actually have in this book, I don't think, but I've thought about it for any future stories maybe, is having someone who could shrink to pocket size, and because I think that would be really cool. So anyway, so that's like a potential dragon power that I don't think that people are too aware of, because we're so used to the Western style dragon.
Well, dragons are also, I wouldn't, just because you're influenced by Western stories, I wouldn't beat yourself up too much about it. Dragons are by nature formidable. It would be a little different if it was like the Rooster Lord, right? It might not have the same effect.
Right.
I'm the Rooster Lord. I'm gonna lay you an egg.
I am actually a year of the dragon, and so I found myself comparing myself to the evil dragon lord and plotting world domination. But I also found your use of the zodiac animals a really neat way to introduce readers to Asian cultures and traditions, which leads me to my next question about representation. Even though Midaga is this made up mythical land, it is steeped in Asian culture. And so why was it important for you to create this world with Asian traditions and such?
Well, just as I had mentioned earlier, by being so influenced by the Western stories that I'd read growing up and having it color how I saw everything, like dragons, all the books that I read growing up were featuring people that didn't look like me. And even so, I would identify with these characters and fall in love with them and follow their stories, and I'd be transported to their world. And I just wanted to, looking back on my childhood and thinking about the stories that I loved, I thought I just kind of wished that I had something where it featured people that looked like me. And wouldn't that be cool if other kids read stories that featured people that didn't look like them and still would identify with the main characters? Because that's what I did when I was growing up, and it didn't even occur to me that I was doing it. So I remember wanting to be so badly. I really wanted to be a little girl living on the prairie in the 1870s, like traveling across the prairie in a covered wagon and eating cornmeal mush,
Oh, same here. My name is Laura, so the fact that there was Laura Ingalls Wilder was just
right. You're like, oh,
familiar with. It's called Little House on the Prairie, and
I have very, very, very different what I want to be than you guys. So.
Well, it's because that's what we were exposed to.
Exactly. Or like the Chronicles of Narnia, like wanting to be a little British kid, drinking tea, eating buttered toast and marmalade, which I actually don't like marmalade, but reading about it, I thought it was the most delectable sounding thing. And, eating Turkish delight because it sounded so amazing, even though I had no idea what Turkish delight was. And when I finally found out what it was, I was like, oh, that's not anything. That's not how I envisioned it at all. So, just some of these things that I was exposed to in my reading, like I I would read about characters eating roast beef and potatoes and Yorkshire pudding for supper, and thinking that that was super normal, even though that wasn't anything like what I ate in my own home. We had rice, we ate rice and lots of other things, but the stuff that I ate was nothing like what I was reading about. And yet I still loved reading these stories. And I kind of just wanted to turn the tables a little and have kids envision what it might be like to, really wish for a yummy bowl of rice, and what it would be like to just live in a land where that was more similar, I think, to, my family's background and all the rich mythology that exists in Asia. I feel like there's less exposure to that here in the West or in the States. And I kind of wanted to write a story in English for an English-speaking audience that incorporated some mythology from Asia, because it's so rich. And I felt like it just wasn't being explored. So I kind of wanted to bring that to the table.
Well, Lee, how did you feel reading this book?
I was really excited when I read the 12 because it was, it's a big fly. Sorry. I was really excited when I read the 12 because it was the first book that I read that was an Asian culture or an Asian world. And I could really identify with the characters. And I wanted to ask, how did you come up with the names for your characters?
Ooh, that's a great question. So if you don't know, Usagi actually means rabbit in Japanese, and Tora means tiger in Japanese, and Uma means horse in Japanese. In fact, I did take a lot of inspiration for names from Japanese because I lived in Japan, and I felt like these names would be easy to pronounce, relatively easy to pronounce. They wouldn't be super intimidating, I thought, to an English-speaking audience. And what I liked was that there was also a double meaning. So, I felt like it was a nice way to sneak in a little vocabulary. And I didn't stick only to Japanese. So the tigress, or the former tiger warrior who is now the priestess in book 1, she's the tiger warrior, and her name is Horangi, and that means tiger in Korean. I also, if you look at Druk, the dragon warrior, Druk actually is taken from, it's the name for dragon, the word for dragon in Bhutan. So I definitely looked at different languages, Asian languages, and borrowed names of actual creatures for the character names, but I wasn't like it wasn't hard and fast. It wasn't like a hard, fast rule. So for instance, like Nezu, he's born in the year of the rat, but Nezu isn't quite it doesn't really mean rat. It's part of the word for rat, but the word for rat in Japanese is Nezumi, but Nezumi sounded too feminine to me in English, so I cut off the me and just made it Nezu. So it's definitely kind of a weird art. Like it wasn't a hard, fast rule that I would be using absolute vocabulary to name the characters, but I thought it was kind of a nice little Easter egg. And so that's kind of how I came up with character names. It was like a fun game.
So interesting to hear your process. And I just wanted to read a couple of comments on the sidebar. These were comments when you were reading the excerpt, Cindy. Lori Young said, "That was wonderful. I closed my eyes and thought you had a cast of actors reading it." Tim Cow, "I love the voices. Audiobook, please." So if you don't have one, you should get working on one. Great voices, Cindy. So good. And then there's also one in the love your dramatic interpretation as always. Thanks for your comment, Margaret. Lee, do you want to read this question from Helena?
Now that you finished with duology, what's next?
What's next? I am working on another story. I have been asked if there's another story coming in this series. And it is a duology, which means duo, which means two. But that's not to say that I don't have other story ideas that's set in this world. That I think for now, those are going to be on the back burner. And in the meantime, I am working on another story that's also a fantasy adventure. I don't know how much I can say just yet. I don't think there's anything really official I can say just yet, but I am working on another story, and it will be something that I hope to share with everybody soon, or I hope to share news about it with people soon. It's very vague. I'm sorry, but I am working on like another fantasy adventure.
Something is brewing that we can.
Yes, something's brewing. I'm working on something. There will hopefully be more books or more stories out there in the future.
Yay. Cindy, I'd love to ask you, since we both worked in news and nonfiction, did working in news kind of influence or help prepare you in any way for writing fiction, middle grade fiction?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because when I first started thinking about writing fiction, I realized that it was a completely different beast. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to take all these courses. It's very different from nonfiction. And certainly that's true. And yet, when you're writing, even when you're writing fiction, you're still creating a world, and it needs to be authentic. And I mean, with nonfiction, you're researching, right? When you're telling a story in nonfiction and you're reporting, you're doing the research, you are gathering all the information to tell the story as best you can. And actually, it's very similar to fiction writing. That part doesn't change. What I found really valuable in being a journalist and learning to do the research and do the reporting, that all carried over in a way that I hadn't expected. When I first started writing fiction, I thought, you're making up the whole world. You can make up anything. You can do whatever. But that's actually not true, because if you make up something without grounding it in some sort of reality, readers are going to pick up on that, right? They're going to be like, unless you set the rules for this world, like, your feet are on the ground and, everyone's head is this way up. And if you're going to create a world where everyone's upside down, then you better set the ground rules, and you better research, like, does that even work? And how would that work? What's the science behind it? It needs to feel authentic and real. And that's where reporting and research come in. And for instance, let me just give you an example. I actually took it out of the first book, but I ended up putting it into the second book because I had to cut it from the first book. The first book was so long. But I had like all these archery scenes where Usagi was learning to shoot a bow and arrow and hit a target and all of that. And I had an entire, section that was all about archery that I cut out. And so when I wrote the second book, I was like, I want to put some archery in there. And of course, I ended up not using any of what I had originally written. I ended up writing whole new scenes that had archery in them. But I finally took like an archery course in real life to see what it felt like, and to actually handle a bow, and actually what it felt like to shoot an arrow. And when I took my first archery course, one of the first things that we learned was, do not pluck the string without an arrow in it. You should never do that, because if you do, you could actually destroy your bow, because the string has nothing to absorb the shock or the energy that is released when you pluck the string. So if there's nowhere if it doesn't get absorbed into an arrow, for instance, it just goes into the bow and your bow could shatter. So they were like, never, never just pluck the bow. And I was like, oops, it's a good thing that I cut all that out from the first book, because in the first book I had her plucking away, without any arrow in the bow. So there were definitely things that I learned from doing the research that helped me as I was writing to make those scenes feel more authentic, so that if anyone does practice archery and they read the scene that has archery in it, they're not like, that's totally wrong. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Like, that's the worst thing, right? So even if it's made up, you still want to do the research so that it feels real. And that's what that's where I found journalism, my journalism background, really, really handy.
Well, I have a young archer sitting next to me. So was Cindy pretty accurate?
Yeah. Pretty. I mean, you go tinily, like really small to make sure the string's secure, but you can't like that.
Well, she loves those scenes. So if you have any more questions about archery, you can.
Oh, good. Yes, I'm not an expert.
I loved hearing that. And I think that addresses Tim's question, which was, can you describe the research process? And did you use any special libraries, go to any museums or Google search or any other kind of research tool?
That's a great question.
You actually really personally engaged in the research yourself. Yes, what you have a question, or you want to read a question? Or you have a question?
I was going to say the question in the chat that someone wrote would probably be a good question.
This one right here?
Yeah.
Okay, from Shirley. Yes, actually, we also had that as one of our questions. Thanks, Shirley. She says, hi, Cindy. Who did the artwork and what did they use to color it? And Lee and I really love the artwork on the covers.
Oh, yes. The artwork on these covers are just magical. And all credit goes to the artist. Her name is Cheryl Ung, and she lives in Australia. She's Australian. She's actually of Chinese Malaysian descent. I actually got a chance to meet her in September. She happened to be in Pasadena, of all places, for a big animation conference. And so I was like, oh my God, you're going to be in LA. I got to meet you. So we met up. She's fabulous. We had a great time. And she shared some really cool drafts of previous covers so cover ideas that she had put together for both the 12 and Treasures of the 12. And I'd love to share those with you guys just to show you how different things, how the process is. And it's same for writing too. You can have lots of drafts along the way and they can be very different from the final result. So let me see, let me just show you. So you've got this, right? And I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Let's see. Okay. And then I can show you some of the, okay, let's see. All right. So let me first show you. So this is one of the ideas she had for Treasures of the 12. And then here is another one where, you know, there's still a a butterfly. And then you see the characters, they're much smaller than in the first or in the final version. And then you can see the animals, the spirit forms there in the back cover. So that was like another version. And then this is the one that's closest to the final version. So you've got the butterfly on the back cover, and then you've got the kids on the front. And then there were several color ideas. So I will show you, let's see. Okay, so this is just sort of a color scheme. And so it's more purple blue. And then here is a nighttime scene where there's no animals on the back, but you can see like glowworms, fireflies. So it's more of an evening scene. And then here's the one that I fell in love with, and is the one that the publisher ended up going with, which is, it's more green focused with some touches of blue. So that was really fun. And then let me just show you for fun a little bit of the first book.
Colors are so gorgeous.
So here are some sketches from for the first book, for the 12. So as you can see, you've got the Dragon Lord's eye and the tigress, and then you've got, you know, the characters. They're very tiny. And then this one is kind of closer to the final version. It's again just kind of a sketch. And then I think this is the one that's the closest. And I can show you, actually that at one point it might have been a blue cover for the 12. But then she ended up going with the lovely sort of coral and orange sort of sunset scene, which I absolutely love. And then just to scare you guys a little, this is just sort of something she sketched up for the Dragon Lord, kind of his alter ego, which I think he looks really fierce. So yeah, that I thought was really fun to look at because as someone who can't draw to save my life, it's really fun to see how it evolves. And even for artists who are super talented, they have to go through like lots of ideas and sketch out stuff.
Did you, were the characters as they were drawn, as you envisioned them in your mind as you were writing the book?
Oh, you know, it's interesting because before, I think even before they found the illustrator or the artist, they asked me what I envisioned. And so they had sort of like a list of questions. My publisher had asked me, and I'm lucky because not every author gets asked these questions, but they did. They were really great about kind of asking for some input. So I did get a chance to say, well, this is what I'm envisioning. These are the kinds of clothes that I think they would wear. In my head, as I was writing the book, I had kind of envisioned the characters dressed in these types of clothing, and I would send them examples, real life examples, as to give them some inspiration. And also, like, they wanted little character sketches of what each character looked like. So I would draw, like, I would write up like a little, you know, for each character, like a couple of lines about what they looked like, but how they wore their hair, all of that. And so I did give them sort of like a character sketch list. And then I guess when they found the illustrator, the artist, they worked with her on that. And it's interesting because with the second book, as I was writing the butterfly scene, I kind of realized like, oh, this might be a cool cover idea. Like this would be really cool if it ended up on the cover. But I didn't say anything. And then when my editor asked me, do you have any ideas for the cover in terms of scenes that we can draw from? I said, well, I do. And then I gave her like a bunch of ideas of different scenes. But she was like, I kind of think that the butterfly scene would be a great cover. And I was like, actually, me too. And what was really exciting was that Cheryl had read a very rough draft of the book before she started work on the cover. So when I saw the sketches, I could tell that she had read the book. And even though the version that she read changed over time, like I never cut that scene. The scene had always stayed in. So anyways, I had always envisioned that the cover would be green and that it would have a butterfly on it. So I'm super excited that it turned out that way.
The colors are gorgeous, and the butterfly scene in the book is so good. Lee, you have a question, and I think our viewers also
actually,
have a question.
How long did it take to write the Treasures of the 12? And how did it compare to writing the 12? And which one do you think was easier?
And Joanne also had that question, so thank you, Joanne.
That's a great question. Definitely the second book, I had to write a lot more quickly because I had this deadline that was in the contract. So for the first time, I had to write with a deadline kind of like hanging over my head. So the first book, the 12, I wrote many different versions before it actually was sold. And the very first draft of the 12 was, back then the title was Warriors of the Zodiac. So it had a very different name. And Warriors of the Zodiac took me almost 2 years to write. And I really didn't know what I was doing. And I thought, as soon as I finish, I'm going to feel so happy. And then when I finished it, I immediately was like, yay, for about 2 seconds. And then I was like, oh no, it's terrible. And I ended up throwing it all out and starting all over. And when I started all over, it took me a full year to write the next version. And then that version I threw out, and then I started all over again. And then that one took me, the third version took me 8 months. So I was getting a little faster with each try. But, you know, all those iterations and all those drafts, and of course for each version, there were multiple drafts too. So I rewrote it a lot. And from the time I had the idea to the actual publication was about 10 years. Which not everybody takes that long. But for me, it took about 10 years to get from the initial idea of, oh, kids with Zodiac powers to an actual book on the shelves. With the second book, I had much less time. So I started writing it in the summer of 2018. And I turned in a draft, very, very rough draft, to my editor in December of that year. So 6 months. And then in 2019, I was revising it. So I got notes from her. I revised it a couple times, and then I turned in my final edits in February of this year. So it was a lot more compressed in terms of the time period.
Well, the mommy in me is wanting to say like teachable moments. See, like revision.
Yes.
And I was saying that it's kind of like childbirth, right? Your first one is like so painful, and it's like a much different process. The second one, you know, you just kind of sneeze and then there he is. But anyway, I digress. Cindy, talking about your writing process, what were some of your bigger frustrations in the writing process, and how did you overcome them?
You know, frustrations, I think they never really go away when you're trying to get something from your head into the world, like trying to get it onto the page. I think this applies for anybody who's trying to create anything. You have in your head a version that in your head is like perfect, and then when you try to actually execute and put it on paper, or you know, if you're painting something, or if you're just, you know, making something, like sculpting something, if you're creating anything, I think what actually comes out is it often falls short along the way. And so that's where the revision comes in to play, because you're just trying to get it better. You're trying to improve it and get it to the point where it kind of matches up with what you had in mind. And you may never get there, but there's definitely, I think for me, the hard parts are when I'm, you know, struggling to put something on the page, and I know it's not where I want it to be, and I feel like, oh no, this is garbage. But I force myself to keep going, because I know that if I just put something down on paper, I can go back and make it better. So it's kind of like pushing all the clay from your brain onto the table, like this imaginary table, and you're just trying to push out clay. And then once you actually have the clay on the table, you can mold it, you can, you know, you can shape it, you can cut stuff away, you can add bits. And so I think just allowing myself to feel frustrated, but also remind myself that what I put out right there in the moment is not going to be the final product, and I can always make it better. Until my editor says I have no more time and that we have to go to print. So,
thank you.
There was one more question that was in the chat that I also had, and so I loved your book so much, and you inspired me to want to write a book, which isn't going very well.
Well, that's why you have your question.
I know. And what advice do you have for writers and kids who want to become writers?
I love that you are interested in writing, and that reading books inspires you to write, and even reading my books makes you want to write. I love that, and that is the biggest compliment that I could ever get from anybody, because that's how it worked for me. Just reading so many books as a kid, I was a total bookworm, and that's what inspired me to write, is just reading all these stories and then wanting to put together stories of my own. I feel like it's a very natural, to me at least, it feels natural to want to write after you read so much because, and I heard this from an author long ago, but basically it's reading is the inhale and writing is the exhale. And so the more you read, the more you're going to want to write. And that's kind of the beauty of it, right? I think that if you want to become a better writer, it helps to read as much as possible and to read anything and everything. You can read things over and over again if you want. It doesn't matter what it is. There's no such thing as a bad book. You know, if you are interested in reading graphic novels, that's awesome. If you like reading books in verse, that's awesome. If you love picture books, like just read whatever you love to read. And the thing is, in reading, you really start to absorb, almost like by osmosis, but you start to absorb the rhythms of language and also grammar. Like you might not know how to diagram a sentence or know all the rules of grammar if someone like, you know, said, quick, name all the rules. But it doesn't matter because when you read, you absorb all those subconsciously. And then when you see a sentence that is not grammatically correct, you'll feel it. It'll like sound off to you, kind of like I don't know, like an off-key note, you know. You'll just absorb what is the rhythms and the music of the language, and then you'll come up with your own voice. So I would say to anybody who wants to write, whether you're an adult or you're a kid, absolutely read as much as you can and practice writing, even if it's just writing in a journal or just writing like a little poem every day. Practice writing every day as well. And eventually you might find yourself coming up with something and then looking at it later and going, hey, that's not so bad. So.
Well, Joanne Shen said, I love that quote. And speaking of reading, Eugene has a question, which is, what were your favorite books as a kid?
Hey, so it's Max, just quick interruption. This is going to be the last question. We're almost out of time, but still feel free to take your time on this last question.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Max. So the question was what my favorite books were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh, I have so many. And there were definitely books that I read over and over again. So I know that we had mentioned the Little House books and also the Chronicles of Narnia. But I also, I did read a lot of old-fashioned books because they were kind of what was around at the time. I loved A Little Princess, The Secret Garden. There were these books that they're still out today, but they were written like at the turn of the last century. It was the Betsy Tacy books by Maud Hart Lovelace. And so it was about a girl who wanted to be a writer. I really loved reading about people who wanted to be writers. I think because I wanted to be a writer. I loved reading, Little Women, you know, which was a movie recently. I mean, again, and the main character in that book, she also wanted to be a writer. Those were definitely the books that I loved growing up. And then more recently, I still love reading books for kids and middle grade adventure in particular. So, you know, the Harry Potter books were a really huge inspiration for me. There are so many other series out there that are great as well. But I think those, I'm just looking at my shelves right now. And Lord of the Rings, that was like another one. And my favorite, which I didn't read until I was an adult, but I think it's one of my favorite series. It's called The Golden Compass. It's the His Dark Materials series. So the first book is The Golden Compass, and then it's followed by The Subtle Knife, and then The Amber Spyglass. And they're by Philip Pullman, and I really love them. They're super cool. And they actually have people it's a world where the people, instead of having animal powers, they have an animal companion that is called a demon, and it represents their soul. So it's kind of cool.
Thank you for those recommendations. And I guess we're out of time, but Cindy, thank you so much. I mean, I feel like you touched upon so many timeless themes in your books. I mean, you talk about friendship and teamwork and sisterhood, diversity, freedom, hope. It's so rich. And sisterhood and brotherhood, and it just speaks. And what I love above all is that you're writing about this generation of younglings that are fighting for a brighter future. So I think that we can all relate to that and hope that that's something that's happening today.
Yes.
So thank you everyone for joining this chat. And Cindy, why don't you just tell us, because all of you, if you haven't purchased Treasures of the 12, you can do so here by clicking on this button, but you also have some information, Cindy, about like a special raffle or something that's happening?
Yes, actually, if you do, it ends on Monday, this coming Monday, but there's still a pre-order campaign going on. There was one with Vromans that ended this past Monday. But if you ordered your book, or you order your book from another vendor, anywhere where books are sold, send me proof of purchase to pre-order Treasures of the 12 at gmail.com, and I will send you a little swag pack. It's flat, so like nothing big, but it'll be like, here, I'll show you. Actually, let me just show you real quick. If you go to my website, which is cindylynnbooks.com, and then you go under books, and there's a tab for the pre-order campaign. You'll find all the information there, but you can see the swag that I'll send you, and you'll be entered into a raffle, and it's going to be 3 paperbacks. It'll be paperback of the 12, and then the paperbacks, the 2 books in this trilogy by Amy Kaufman, who read Treasures of the 12 and then said some really lovely things about it, and her blurb is actually on the cover. So I'm giving away 2 of her books and 1 of mine, and also a $25 gift card. And so that is going to be the raffle. So if you participate in this pre-order campaign, you will get added into a drawing, and that ends on Monday. So you still have all weekend to send me your proof of purchase.
Fun. So. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but I think we got through a lot of them. And yeah, sign up for the raffle, because looks like there's some good swag there. Anything else?
Thank you so much, everybody. It was so great to talk to you, Laura, and to talk to you, Lee, and everyone had such great questions. So thanks for coming.
Thank you, Cindy and Laura and Lee, for just that incredible conversation. It was really fun listening to your book. And thank you for just answering the questions so thoughtfully. And you were incredible. So thank you again. And thank you everyone in the audience for tuning in tonight. If you'd like to support our bookstore, again, you can go ahead and buy the book by clicking that green button. And you can also visit the Cindy's pre-order campaign through the link that I just sent in the chat. But with that all being said, thank you all so much and have a good night.
Thank you for hosting.
Bye.
Of
course.
Bye.